this turd train rolling.
Let's do it. All right, so right before we get into things, a couple special announcements before we get into the big thick. So, the song of the week, number one, is drumroll. It is Chippin' In 2018 version by Kenny Eurodyne.
Hell yeah!
So thank you to everyone for the submissions, and congrats to Moish for winning the random number generator.
Hell yeah!
Um,
RN Jesus is with me.
and if the link could be posted in the chat, please.
Yes, I shall.
Or in the song of the week chat meme.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just give me
Yeah.
a moment.
Yeah. All right, it'll be
I've
in there.
literally never won a single raffle in my entire life. This is the first time.
Well, hell yeah, bro. So yeah, yeah, that one won. Give it a listen. We'll be talking about it in this section of next week. And be sure to submit more songs to have the meme be memed, to have the chance of being Keanu right here, being the beautiful person that Keanu points at. All right. And Anthony's being
It's time for
overloaded
me to show.
with tasks right now.
So basically, GPC is running a game jam, but it's not just your regular old game jam. It's called the Mechanics Jam, and it's a game jam that takes place over 36 hours, where you basically focus your efforts on making a very polished singular mechanic for like any kind of game you want. Really, just take the three themes that we give you, um, mix them around. You don't have to use all three. Just pull inspiration from the three different like words that we give you, and make a mechanic out of it and make it really polished. It's taking place between the 27th at 2 p.m. to the 28th at 8 p.m. And yeah, bring your team. Sign up form is in the GPC server under the announcements. Yeah, come out to the Mechanics Jam. It's gonna be lots of fun.
Alrighty, thank you for that. Everyone, you can come out of your days now. Back to the important stuff.
Wow.
Sorry, my eyes glazed over for about 5 minutes. What happened?
Oh, it's all good. But yeah, the last semi-important announcement is that we are kind of hiring. We're gonna be making a form to apply to join the team. Don't worry, it's nothing too crazy. We're not gonna like do a background check on you. But yeah, more details will come with time, as we kind of work everything out smoothly and get exactly how we want it to. But yeah, keep an eye out for that if you're interested. And yeah, that should be coming out in the next week or two. So onto the shmeem of the week. It is mixing game audio, which is sadly the penultimate session of this year, but it's been a pretty solid run. I'm pretty confident that it's been a good time. So right into it without dwelling on the sadness. Overview, just a quick kind of glance at what we'll be doing today. What is mixing? Why is mixing? When is mixing? How do mixing? Mixing is hard, and some tools to help mixing. So very succinct and hopefully right to the point. So let's get right to the point. What is mixing? Basically, layman's terms, it is just blending of audio tracks together and keeping every single layer audible in a mix. All the frequencies should be clear, and just a few aspects of mixing are balancing the levels, panning the tracks to the left and right or center, balancing the frequencies of a track, etc. So it's basically it's one of the main things that you need to do with music and sounds as well, which we will get into. But you're probably wondering, because you've probably heard another very similar word, mastering. So you're probably wondering, what's the difference between mixing and mastering? So mixing is, like I said, each individual track. You're adjusting each of those so that they all kind of come together in one kind of congruent place. and it has multiple tracks, and it's built off of the stems usually, or just each of the tracks in a multi-track, which was basically just me saying different words for the exact same thing 3 times, but you know what? It's fine. So yeah, mixing is really about fleshing out the sound, whereas mastering, you take the final mix of the track, which is usually flattened down to a single track, or just the sum of all the tracks. So that would be like mixing or mastering in a master bus, on a mixing, mixing board. Sorry, my brain just died. So it would be there, and it's usually a lot more subtle. So mixing in the mixing stage, you'll be doing the more dramatic things, like, okay, let's crank the bass to inaudible levels just for the meme. Whereas mastering, you're not going to reduce it again. Like, you'll probably just be like, okay, let's tweak it a little bit. So like, if you need to make radical changes to the mix in the mastering stage, you should probably go back to the mixing stage. It's all about taking the final mix and just polishing it. So that's a bit of the difference there. And now back to mixing and why do we need it? So, as we know, since we're all gamers here, games have a ridiculous amount of sounds going on at all times. Like, just taking Doom as an example. So you got Mick Gordon with his chainsaw and his 9 strings, basically at all times with the music. You got every individual demon making noises, the attack sounds that accompany each demon, the footsteps of every demon and the player, the ambient world noises that might be happening, like fire, wind, that sort of thing. There's shooting your weapons, the sound of the weapon switching or activating a mod. And there's pickup sounds, UI sounds, like the jerry can for the chainsaw being filled up. Damage sounds, your shots hitting enemies, and all that's just off the top of my head. Like, there's a ridiculous amount of sounds that go into every game. So the point of that long tirade is that I'm able to point out that each of those sounds exist and that they can exist simultaneously. So because of that, each sound, like in a good mix, especially the important ones though, should be as clear cut and just cut through the mix as much as possible. So it should notify the player of important things, like the chainsaw. In Doom Eternal, you need to have that, or you need to know when that's ready, since that's your reload button basically. So let's say you're running out of ammo, and then you hear in your right ear, usually I think, you hear the jerry can of the chainsaw fill up, and when you hear that sound, it cuts through the mix perfectly, and you're like, okay, I can use the chainsaw again to cut a demon in half and get all my ammo back. So the other reason why we need it is it really fills out the soundscape. So with a poor mix, with a really muddy mix, it can be really tight. It can be really claustrophobic. It can be just really kind of, it can be very limiting to the player. So with a wide soundscape, with a very bright and kind of filled out landscape or soundscape, it can really liven up the game, if that makes sense. Like, it makes it feel more lived in, makes it feel more real, makes it a lot more immersive in most cases, but at the end of the day, it just provides the player a better experience and better feedback. So, when should you be mixing? You should always be mixing. Always have it on the top of your mind. Think about when you need room. Think about where certain things should sit in the mix, and mix as you go. So as you're writing the song, or as you're making the sound effects, you should be thinking about, okay, how would this sit in the grand scheme of things, and try to adjust it there, just so that when you get to the stage where everything is going at the same time, which we'll eventually get to in this, that you just need to make minor adjustments. So again, be conscious of the room you need, and at the end, like I said, just clear everything up, clean it up, just take a mop to it, do a couple quick sweeps, but it should be fine. Because if you mix as you go, it really makes the final mixing process significantly easier, especially if you've been conscious of where you need to go and have a clear idea of what you want. So, how do we do it? How do we go about it? Um, so a lot of it has to do with plugins and lots of plugins. So you got your EQs, your compressors, pretty much anything that could be a guitar pedal. That's a good way I like to think about it since I'm mainly a guitarist, or at least that's how I started. So use your plugins to kind of spice up the sound, and it adds a bit of flavor to it, you know? Another thing you could do is noodling around with the volume slider on the mixer. That's the main thing people think of when you say the word mixing. They think of the big mixing board and like all the volume sliders, um, and all that stuff. So the other thing that's on the mixing board that people tend to gloss over is the panning. So this is ridiculously important to give stereo separation. So even just doubling apart and panning one of them hard left and one of them hard right can really make it a really impressive effect and really widen your sound. Um, so like for my music in particular, just because this is a good example from my experience, but when I'm working on my songs, usually because usually it's a bass led thing, and then the guitar comes in to really punch it into overdrive. What I do is I like to record the guitar part once and then record the exact same thing again, and then just pan one of them hard left, one of them hard right, and then when I want really emphasized guitar, I do another one straight down the middle. Um, so doing that can really give it a very wide feeling. Um, but that's the other thing. It mostly just applies to music because in a 3D space with 3D audio, most of these things should be mono. Um, because if you're looking directly at an enemy that you're standing right in front of and it makes a sound in your right ear, it's going to throw you off. So it should just be uh, kept to mono when possible, with stereo separation and panning used mostly for music. And at the bottom, got a few examples of pictures, all from FL Studio. So bottom left, it was just the volume mixer, um, and just a general look at the mixer panel. So you got the master on the left, and then three of the inserts there, with the volume slider there. And as you can see, that little green squiggly line going into the master from insert 1, that means that it's just hooked up to the master bus. So we'll get into buses in, I think, the next slide, one of the next slides. But that's basically just saying, okay, if you adjust the master volume, it will change the volume of this one as well. So yeah, routing the channels into buses, it can really ease the load on you, just giving quick control over many different audio channels. So like drums in particular, that's a really easy example of it. So you have the drum bus that has everything under it, and you just don't want drums in a certain spot, you just drop the volume there. So it's really easy, it's really quick to modify, and it still lets you adjust everything individually as well. So it's great there. And then the middle and the bottom, I got a couple EQs there. You got the master EQ, which is the bottom left, and that's just in the master panel. You just adjust it there, with those three things. And I tried to replicate the same thing across all three of these. Then I got EQ up top, and then the fruity parametric EQ2, which is arguably the best one that comes with FL Studio. But just wanted to give some diversity. And the third thing on the bottom is a couple panning things. So you just got fruity balance, which honestly I haven't used. Fruity panomatic, which I've used I think once or twice. And then what I should have highlighted or something or circled, but right under where it says insert 1, the little circle there, that's actually a panner. So if you drag it left and right, up and down, it'll change which side it pans to. and it's really easy. You don't need to slap another plugin on it, but the plugins exist if you want them. And just one last thing I want to touch on when it comes to panning. Panning drums and percussion is probably one of the most effective uses of panning. So we've all heard or I'm hoping we've all heard in like a rock song or something, the drummer does like a roll, and it goes from left to right or right to left. So that's done like in recording if it's a live setting, or if it's a live recording of the drummer in the studio. That would normally be done with an overhead mic, kind of being like, okay, this is the position of all the drums, and it just picks up that naturally. But you can do that digitally through panning, and just kind of roughly set up where it sits in the kit, and that can produce an awesome effect, especially when it comes to complex tom arrangements or like weird drum fills. It's really great. All right, and more about how do we go about it. Like I said, we're gonna get into buses here. So like I said, a drum bus, it can control all the drums at once with you still able to adjust like anything like the snare. If let's say the snare is really loud, punches through everything, you can adjust that as you will without affecting everything else, while at the same time you can drop all the drums to 0 and not affect anything else. It's great. So just a few other ways to make sure you're mixing well. You should be testing on as many systems as possible. Listen to it on whatever you can, be it studio monitors, a TV, monitors, built-in speakers, some earbuds, or a good headset. Doing that kind of stuff can really help nail down a solid mix and make it sound good across a variety of systems from the mixing stage. However, most will say that high quality studio monitors, or just monitors in general, is probably the best way to go. And honestly, I've found that pretty true in my experience. Not just with game sound and music, but with my own stuff. It's just good to get the wide range that these can provide. So yeah, next thing, normalize your stuff. And loudness normalize as well. This is something that was just included in the newest, or one of the newest Audacity updates. I just downloaded it recently, but it has the loudness normalization now. So you can normalize the perceived loudness and a few other things right there. Just make it whatever volume you want it to, and the perceived loudness, or how loud it sounds, will change rather than how loud it is in decibels, because it doesn't exactly translate to how we experience loudness. So there's LUFS, which means loudness units relative to full scale, and those are basically just a more accurate representation of loudness. Yeah, and in a DAW at the bottom left there, Ulian Loudness Meter 2, it is fantastic. There's a free version, and it's really good. Use that. It's really good for just getting a grasp of how loud it really is, and then you can adjust there. So keeping loudness in mind is super important, especially when it comes to games, because making everything super loud at all times can really muddy the sound and muddy the mix. So toning it back to let all the dynamic range through, and keep it less compressed, is vital for a really clear sound. So like I said, if you crank the volume, chances are high it'll end up sounding really compressed, and that's just not as fun as hearing the whole range. And honestly, it could honestly have a negative effect. Like let's say there's a very important audio cue, you could miss that if the mix is too muddy. So another reason why it's really important. So with all that being said, mixing is hard. Like I said before, games have a ridiculous amount of sounds playing at all times. So with the sheer amount of things that are all playing at once, it's going to be hard and it's going to be overwhelming. Like, I just listed a few things here. You could probably think of more. But all of this alone, most games have all this, and it's a ton. But we have everything we need to work with it, and we can get through it. And as sound designers, we have all the tools we need to mix. So let's get into that. Tools that will help us in this glorious pursuit of the perfect mix. So just starting off simple, the mixer. And right here I just showed off a couple other examples. So again, FL Studio bottom left, but then there's the two types of mixers in FMOD Studio. So you got the mixer rack that's closer to the general mixer that you've normally seen, and then right beside that, that's just the mixer in the track layout. So pretty much every single DAW under the sun has it. I would be shocked if a DAW didn't have an audio mixer. And most middleware has it built in, like in the examples FMOD. So yeah, starting off by just using the volume faders and panning is honestly a really solid foundation for a mix later on, because this gives you a good idea of a rough mix without any effects on it. And it's a great way to know, okay, what's needed, and okay, this stuff already sounds good, so I don't need to touch that really. And just make adjustments as you go. Keep it simple like that, and then once everything's there, it's a good idea to go back then and be like, okay, effects time. But it's also important to really keep in mind the volume levels. So try to keep everything in a reasonable range so nothing is kind of overshadowing another thing. Like if you crank the crash cymbal, you're probably not going to hear anything. So it's not generally a good idea to do that. Next thing, it's kind of related, but automation. So with games, we're in a really unique spot, because everything is dynamically changing in games with adaptive audio. So you can just dynamically change the volume anytime you want. You can do automation literally anytime you want. Whereas with like a normal piece of music or a movie or something, it'll have to be at a specific time every single time. So that's the great thing about games, but it's also a bit of a curse because that makes it hard. But the great thing about this is that you don't just need to automate volume. So you've probably played a game where there's like an explosion that happens nearby or something. Like Halo Reach comes to mind when you get hit by a concussion rifle, and an explosion goes off in your face. It muffles your hearing for a bit. Yeah, of course it's Halo. What do you expect? It's me. So like you're in the area of an explosion, and everything gets muffled for a minute until it kind of comes out of that. So just doing that would just be a low pass filter that gets applied over everything. And it's like, okay, is the explosion within this distance? Yeah, okay, boom, low pass filter for a few seconds. So that's an example of automating something that isn't volume. So you can link parameters to it as well, and you can link effects to it. So I got two examples there. One of them is just an ambient track, which I wanted to fade in. So there's an audio fade in there at the beginning. And the bottom right, I was just kind of messing around, seeing what I could do. Make a really disgusting sounding clip sound even worse. And it worked. But but like I said, just an example of what you can do, and how extreme you can get. And the other great thing is that it's used in normal pieces of music that are linear to place emphasis on a certain part. So let's say you have a guitar solo or something. You want the guitar to be louder than everything else. You can drop off the volume a little bit for everything else. You can increase the guitar's volume. That would be an automation clip. So it's really great. Helps a lot with dynamic sound. Can be used in a lot of creative ways with games. All right, next up we got effects. And the next few things are kind of tied into this. But this one's just kind of a brief overview of all effects and just generalizing it. So a couple really good ones: compressors and limiters. They can really help kind of hone the shape of the sound and kind of whittle it down to what you want it to be. Like compressors, they take the sound and just kind of flatten it. While that doesn't sound amazing in theory, it can really make something sound a lot beefier and punchier than it normally would be. Like Mick Gordon, there we go. Now I'm talking about Doom. He took that old Russian synth, did a lot of weird things to it, hooked it up to weird guitar pedals and like the ground and his chainsaw, and he threw it in like 3 compressors, and it made the dirtiest sound he's ever heard. And he was like, "Yeah, that's the Doom sound," and then he won an award from it. So never underestimate compressors. However, don't go overboard. We'll get to that when we get to that. But yeah, experiment with effects. I know personally that I have so many effects I want to try, like with my guitar or with anything really, and just kind of see what kind of sound it makes. It's like trying out a new synth. You just want to hear all the sounds and hear all the things that you can make with it. So noodle around with it. You'll find something special at some point. And it's really good to experiment, because just like hooking it up to, let's say you have one effect pedal or one effect plugin and 3 different synths with a bunch of presets. That is all the presets with the effect plugin, with every single variation of the plugin on all of the synths. Like that alone is a ridiculous amount of options you have. So it's great to try new things. Most of audio and most of sound is experimenting, so just go for it. However, try not to go overboard, because using a million effects can really dilute the vision of the project and the sound. Let's say you start off with a very distinct sound. You're like, okay, yes, I know what this is. I recorded it in my basement. I know what this is. Oh, sorry, my throat is closing up on me. I need a sip. Get some orange juice in my body. So yeah, like you're in the basement. You got the person banging on the walls. You're recording it. You're like, cool. You go back upstairs. You lock the door. But like after you throw that through 6 compressors, a phaser, a wah, and a few distortions, it's not going to sound the same. So you should know when too much is too much and try not to go overboard in that direction. Because ultimately, in the end, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, make a good sound or make good music that can kind of captivate the player and reflect the gameplay or reflect a state of the game. So kind of diluting the vision in that way can make it harder to link the 2 experiences in a way. So getting into more effects, we got filters, reverb, and delay. So I touched on this briefly before, but low pass filters, they can add a really muffled effect. So they're great for like if your ears get blown out in a stormy trench of World War I, or in a space battlefield, or if you're in space, or if you're underwater, that sort of thing. Low pass filters are great for that. It basically just muffles all the high end and just cuts it all out, so you just hear the low end. And high pass filters, they do the opposite of that. They cut out most, if not all, of the low end and add a sort of warmth to it, which I used last year for some of the enemies in our game Primordial, to kind of give them a Combine Soldier voice effect. Like I slapped, I think, a few compressors and then a few high pass filters on it, and it got the effect. So it sounds like you're speaking through like a radio or speaking through a thing. Right, sorry, the game was called Project Inca. I forgot about that. But yeah, high pass and low pass, they're both great. Both have their uses. You should not be sleeping on either of these, since they can be very, very useful, great to experiment with. And at the same time, both filters can be used to kind of clean up a sound, which we'll touch on later, which I think I actually touch on. If not, I'll remember and I'll say it verbally. Very, very prepared for this, clearly. Reverb's great. You know it, you love it. Like a clean tone, all it needs is reverb. Reverb can add depth to the sound, so it really adds space to it. Adds more ambiance to it. But the great thing about it is if you add a little tiny bit of it, that alone can make a sound feel more real. Because just adding a bit of reverb makes you feel, wait a minute, this sound was done in a real space. That is crazy. Wow. It's bouncing off of surfaces. This is nuts. I'm in a video game. How's it doing this? So just throwing on a bit of reverb livens up the sound a bit. And delay at a lower rate can be used like a reverb. But at the same time, a delay being used for like a sound effect, honestly, it's not something I'd use very often, at least. But it can have its place. Like I said in the last slide, experiment, find out new things, try out new things, and chances are you'll find a way to make anything work, to be honest. So none of the rules are kind of hard, none of the rules are really hard. They're kind of just soft rules that, like, yeah, you can break this and you can still be wildly successful with what you want to do. So back to the great thing, panning. The process of being smacked in the face with a pan, and you hear it from both the left and right ear. So a couple great things that you can do through panning is to balance the left and right. So having all the sounds come through the left ear, I'm sure we've probably all experienced a YouTube video where the sound isn't done properly and it's just in one ear, or if an earbud dies when you're like listening to something and it's just coming through one ear. It's really kind of a painful experience, to be honest. Like I can't stand it. So a good way to do this or avoid that is just to balance it. So keeping things near the center as often as possible, and then just kind of moving out evenly away from that. So let's say you have 3 cymbals on the right side. You should have 3 cymbals in roughly the same spot, or a couple of high things, high frequency things on the left side in roughly the same spot. That way it just balances it out. The other thing you should be very conscious about, since games, at least in this context that I'm talking about, are generally 3D or are using positional sound, this could throw off the player. So with music in particular, having a big swell in one ear could be a false alert of like an enemy running up behind them or something like that. So you should be very careful with how you use panning, particularly in music, because like I said, the sound effects sort of thing, generally if it's a 3D space, you should be using a mono sound effect and just positioning it where the thing is. That way it's not giving you false information. But yeah, just be conscious of how your audio placement could potentially throw off the player. However, on the flip side of that coin, UI indicators, putting the sound where the visual is, can really help guide the player's attention. So, like I said previously when I was talking about Doom Eternal, and I'm 90% sure this is the case, but the chainsaw, when that refuels, you hear it in the right ear, and the chainsaw icon is in the bottom right. So when you hear that, you go, okay, the chainsaw, and then your eyes go to the bottom right, and you're like, okay, cool, I have 1 pip in it, or I have 2 pips in it, or okay, I ran over a fuel can and picked it up, cool, I'm full, or okay, cool, I ran over some ammo. That sound is where the ammo is. You run over health, that's in the bottom left, I would think. So using that, it can really help guide the player's attention. It can really help with kind of, just guiding the player's eye and making them focus on something just for a brief second and be like, okay, here's information, do with it what you want. And back to music, orchestral arrangements, like the actual physical arrangements of an orchestra, like the positioning of everyone, that can give you a pretty good idea of where to pan things at when you're doing orchestral stuff. And kind of like how reverb adds kind of horizontal depth, or like I'm pushing away, like I'm pushing my hand away, you can't see it, but it goes away, so you're like, okay, this room is a 3D space. Stereo depth can really make things feel wider and larger. So like if everything's just down the middle, you'll feel kind of like, okay, this is a tight space. Whereas if reverb was there, you could be like, okay, it's tight, it's narrow, but it's long. Whereas if there's stereo depth, you could be like, okay, I'm in a very wide cathedral kind of thing. So again, experiment. Not everything is a hard rule. Not everything applies at all times, but just some general things to keep in mind. I'm gonna have another sip of orange juice real quick because my throat. I'm gonna lose my voice at the age of 30, I swear. All right, so EQ, the fun thing. So basically, layman's explanation of it, it's just rolling off frequencies that can just change the sound. It can emulate a high and low pass filter, because that's essentially what a high and low pass filter is. It's just a very specific EQ that's just cutting off low frequencies or high frequencies. And it's great for selectively cleaning up loose noise. And something to keep in mind is that even if it's not audible, there's a chance that it's there and that it's muddying the mix. So like if there's let's say you're doing a bass part, or recording a bass part, you'd expect everything to be kind of down low, but there is the high parts of it that are still there. So like the fingers hitting the strings, that could produce a kind of sharp sound sometimes. And the string buzz as well, that's present. So just kind of throwing a bit of a filter on that and ducking that where possible can clean up the mix in a way that can't really be described just by thinking, okay, yeah, it's all just it's a bass part, it's all low, so I don't need to do that. Like it's still there, it's still something to keep in mind. And kind of on a similar note, while you're emphasizing the important bits, so like in a bass part, you dip the parts that aren't the bass part, like the main thing. You should carve out the dips where there's many sounds. So let's say there's a big orchestra and everything's kind of right down the middle at one point. You should duck the middle just a bit, or a lot. Just depends on your needs, obviously, but ducking the mid can help clear up the sound a bit. And yeah, it really helps it all jive together. And once again, emphasize the important bits. So like, let's say you really want a really hard hitting crash cymbal, then you would take the high frequencies and just jack it up, to make it so that when that crash finally comes in, you feel it and you're like, whoa. So yeah, it can really be good for emphasis. All right, moving away from digital stuff and all that, here's a bit of an interesting tool that can help your ears. Probably wouldn't expect it, being sound and being the main thing you use to perceive sound, but yeah, go figure. So first thing, most important thing, taking breaks. 1 hour of mixing and 10-minute break is something I've seen online many times. And it really helps you maintain some sort of level of objectivity with it. Because if you keep hearing the same thing over and over and over again, you're going to get used to all the bad things in it, or all the things that aren't exactly what you want. So just taking a quick break or taking a day or two just to freshen the palate, cleanse the palate of your ears, that can really help and be beneficial to looking at something and being like, okay, this is good, or yeah, this is not great, I need to change this. Another thing you should do, a lot of these have the word listen in it. You know, it's crazy, it's an ear. There's only so many things you can do with an ear. But listen to how things are mixed. So like games, movies, shows, pretty much anything. All of that is a great reference point, and you should always be using references for a mix. Like example I always go back to, because I'm doing it, my songs that I'm working on, Tool is one of my main references for mixing, since they have a very clear mix and you could just hear everything so perfectly. So that's the kind of thing I want to encapsulate. So I listen to their stuff and I'm like, okay, this is here in the mix. The guitar is usually sitting here. The drums are kind of across everything, but very evenly. The vocals are a bit lower in the pocket. So just giving yourself a reference point can really help, not just clear the palette a bit by listening to something that isn't your track for the 50,000th time, but it also gives you something to look out for or listen out for. And similar to that, listen to your thing before you mix it. So you don't know until the end of it what needs to go up or down in volume generally. Like there is usually a way that you can just listen to it for the first time. That was a word salad. Oh my god. You could listen to it for the first time and be like, wow, this guitar is so incredibly quiet, or wow, I can't even hear this violin. Is it there? Yeah, it's muted. Okay, I unmuted it and it's still super quiet. So even with all that aside, and the clear things aside, listening the whole thing through is a great idea, just to kind of get a frame of reference and be like, okay, in a general sense, this needs to be louder, or like, okay, this is really good here, but this part should be a bit quieter, so I should have an automation clip that dips there. And similarly, listen with your eyes closed. You'd be surprised how much or how different it sounds when you don't have an extra when you don't have all the extra sensory input of your eyes being open. So even just closing your eyes, something as simple as that, not looking at the waveforms on the monitor, that can really help you hear new things. And I'd recommend this with music as well. And just like anything, even a game. Like if you're watching a video of a game being played and you just close your eyes and listen to it, that can really help you kind of identify where everything in the soundscape fits. And just looking at the waveform as well, that's generally I find a bad practice, because that gives you kind of a false expectation, and it takes some focus away from the music. And the last thing, I know it says your ears at the top, but not your ears are great tools to use. So have other people listen to it and get the feedback and go from there. Because even with breaks and even with palette cleansing and taking days, or just being like, okay, I'm done for the day, I'll get back to it tomorrow. Even with all that, having other people listen to it to get feedback from them is invaluable, because it's a fresh pair of ears. They have never heard this before, or have only heard it a few times. So yeah, and now another thing that's not digital, your brain. So as with most things, learning new things and expanding your musical arsenal is a great way to expand your knowledge on mixing. Like, I know that every week when I when I'm doing these, I learn a lot of things, and I feel like with every week I'm learning more things that I can apply. So hopefully that's being passed on. Um, but the point of that is that researching new things and just learning all these new things about these topics, and this topic in particular, mixing and all the new effects and stuff, all that's super invaluable. Like it's ridiculously important to really just get the best quality stuff out there. Um, and kind of on the same note, know your software and hardware. Um, so like my headphones, I am fully aware that the stereo separation is good. However, vertically, or not vertically, like actually yeah, vertically it's not as good. Vertically it's really hard to tell um like where something would sit in a game, at least, like if it's upper below or above me or below me. um and I know that sometimes certain frequencies can get a bit muddy. So once again, that goes back to knowing which things to try it on. So I listen to something on my headset, I could be like, okay, that's cool, let's listen to it through the speakers. um and I just know that, okay, the speakers, they have a very strong bass, so I'm gonna feel it. And the room setup, I know the room setup now, I know how it's gonna bounce off the walls and things like that. So just knowing all this and knowing the hardware can really help be like, okay, I know what is going on in the mix. So second last tool. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Haha, that's funny. Tool to help.
Wow.
YouTube. Definitely not our YouTube channel. Wow. But this guy, in the mix. If you have not seen his stuff on YouTube, you will at some point. He will save your life. He's got easily the best tutorials I've found about FL Studio, plugins, effects, and as you might guess from his name being in the mix, mixing. um, but yeah, he knows what he's doing. He's fantastic. Check out his stuff. He is incredible. He has a very soothing voice, and he will fill your brain with a lot of information. And I know I go back to his videos all the time if I need to like brush up on something, or if I just want to learn something. Like I went to his videos to learn FL Studio. He's, yeah, honestly, invaluable resource. Absolutely go check him out. And for the last tool to help, FMOD Live Update. So this is easily the most helpful thing, like within programs at your disposal. If you're using Unity, it's a thing. Otherwise, it might take some work, but I feel like I've read somewhere that it's possible. So sorry, all the second years, or people using Unreal. But basically, what it does is it allows for mixing in real time while you're running the game. It is super cool, and it's pretty easy to set up. I got a couple screenshots there of the Unity FMOD settings and some screenshots from FMOD, but there's nothing quite like a live demonstration of Live Update shown off live right now. So just gonna go through it quickly since we are at 49 minutes in about 4 seconds. So upon the threat of my death, I said I was gonna show off our game, and since nobody objected on our team, I'm just gonna go do it. So basically, in Unity, what you're gonna want to do is you're gonna go to FMOD, edit settings, and you should have this already set up if you've got FMOD in Unity set up already. But what you're gonna want to do is scroll down to in editor settings and the default settings, and just turn this from disabled to enabled. Leave the port as it is, and then down here you'll be like, okay, bank platform. Chances are it's desktop unless you're crazy and are making a mobile port of something. And then down here, speaker mode, do 5.1 if it's in 5.1. do stereo if it's in stereo, 7.1 if it's in 7.1. And what does all that mean? Well, over here in FMOD, this is the FMOD studio project for our game. What you're going to want to do is check right here. You're going to go under build, under preferences, and then right here you'll be like, okay, which platform is it? Bank platform, desktop? Yep, that's the only one there is. So it's desktop and it's in surround 5.1, so that would be the speaker mode there. So just closing that. What you're going to want to do is you're going to click live update here in the corner, or you can click connect to game. So I'm just going to click that. This is the default thing, but basically what it is you go here, you're going to see that, which is something I'm sure everybody's seen if you're in networking for the past few days. So you're going to do that, but at this port. So you're going to go 9264, and I'm not going to do that because localhost literally is that already. And you're going to hit connect. However, this pops up because you need to be running the game. So where's FMOD? So I'm just going to close that. Going to make it even Steven. I'm going to run the game, grab my controller, and from there you click live update, connect, and is it going to work? Right, you actually need to activate the FMOD listener first. So I just moved the mouse, or moved the thumbstick, and that activated it because FMOD apparently in our game doesn't show up until you make a sound. But yeah, it turns on live update, and here's the great part. You go to here and you click mixer, and right here, this is the greatest thing about it right here. So I'm just gonna wiggle this a bit, and as you can see there, you can't hear it just because, you know, streaming the screen, but when I'm doing this, it makes a whoop sound, and that's it right there, and it's playing through the game, or the UI event. So let's get into the game just so you can see the full breadth of it. So there's music playing, there is the rustling of the trees, there's some crickets. So we got the ambience here, that's the wind in the trees and stuff. We got the music playing as well, and when I move the character, as you can see, general sounds is making noise, and when I attack as well, it does that. And when I'm activating the UI elements, it's, as you can see, down in here, right here in the UI group again. There we go. See, it's making the noise. So basically, what this offers you is a real-time showcase of the mixer and a real-time way to mix in the game. So it's great, especially when you get into a part that tests the dynamic music. So right now it switched to the combat track. So, oh my god, those guys are loud. So I'm just gonna stop that because my ears are being destroyed right now. But yeah, this is a very old build. So basically, the great thing about that is that all of these changes that I've made in the past, they all stay. So when you're doing the live update and the live mixing, it allows you to, like I said, just simply, it lets you change everything on the go. And the best thing here, as you can probably see with all these, you can add effects here too. That's the craziest thing. You can do so much with the live update. It is really incredible. It's an insanely powerful tool. If you're using Unity, I highly recommend it. It's beyond amazing. So just back to this. I'm gonna get the controller off my lap. Yeah, thanks for listening. That is pretty much it today. Just to kind of close up, next week we're on our last session of the year, which is kind of sad. It is the big sad indeed. But we'll be covering the ins and outs of live recording, so we'll be doing like Foley stuff, voice acting and voice direction, all that fun stuff. I will probably play some clips of me destroying my voice because that's fun. But yeah, it'll be a fun time to cap off the first year of GSC, so don't miss out. And just kind of going over a few things again. Remember next weekend, right? Mechanics Jam?
That's right. Next weekend at 2 p.m. on the 27th to 8 p.m. on the 28th.
What that man said. And next week also, next Monday, I think, Hammerod, correct me if I'm wrong, is the second playtest night, so definitely do that if you're interested. And you should be, because playtesting is super invaluable. Yeah, thanks for coming out, everyone. Yeah.